So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to skew a little from soil health and talk about our experience with implementing 4R nutrient stewardship, but I think what you'll find is there are some parallels and some actions that you can learn from within our experience. And I think there are also opportunities to draw upon. Now, I have to start with saying my title is Connecting on Content, and I'm talking about communications and outreach. However, I'm an engineer by training, so I am not a communications expert, but this is something that I have had a good, strong team behind us, and I think it speaks to the importance of having a strong outreach and communications team in your space when you're trying to communicate on an issue or an action, or what a lot of communication is aimed at, behavioral change, which is, I think, also what we're talking about in the soil health space. So just a quick introduction. So the Fertilizer Institute, it's the trade association for the fertilizer industry. As you may guess, we're always having to communicate on issues, a range of things, from keeping barges traffic open on the Mississippi River Basin to addressing water quality issues and working on nutrient stewardship and change efforts. Our main focus in the stewardship space is 4R nutrient stewardship. You've probably seen that 4R come up a couple of times today, and we're really talking about fertilizer BMPs. But I want to give you some insights into our space and let you see where there's some opportunities with soil health communications that you can learn from what we have done. Our efforts in communicating 4R continue to evolve, and I think you will find that as you go down the continued outreach and space in soil health, that you have to keep looking at where you've come from to keep advancing and taking the next steps. For us, we have a significant research fund in place. We have a lot of member information that we can draw upon, and so we have a growing body of evidence that we want to be able to communicate on. I came on 8 years ago. I would say there was some knowledge of the 4R space 8 years ago, but the first thing that we had to do was understand what our audience was and who we needed to communicate to. As that process evolved, we're now evolving in who we communicate to. We started in the retailer certified crop advisor space, but we're transitioning into a farmer-facing communication. Well, for us to do that with this growing body of evidence, we need to understand a little bit about how to communicate to the farmers, who we're communicating to, and how we target our message. So we undertook a survey. The survey we did in the last year, we did a farmer-facing focus group online, and then from what we learned, we moved that and transitioned it into an interview, phone interview with about 200 growers. And what we found as a result of that are some things that I want to share with you today. So one, know your audience, right? And so it's very important for us to understand that not all farmers are the same. We have early adopters, and we have those who are going to wait and see what's happening. Interestingly, now, this isn't absolute, but what we found in our survey is that the people who were maybe the wait-and-see type approach farmers were the smaller income, less income, smaller acreage, and the older generation, right? They were a little less likely to try new things and make changes on their farm. We also wanted to find out where they get their information from. I think this point, while everybody gets this point, there are some very key takeaways here. 76% of farmers speak to other farmers about practices on the ground frequently. And at least in the fertilizer space, their crop advisor is their trusted advisor. When they have questions about what they're doing to make fertilizer decisions, their trusted advisor is the retailer and the crop advisor. That's not surprising, but what does that mean for us and when we communicate? And so when we look at farmers speaking to other farmers, that means that we have to build on that interpersonal relationship, and Bianca alluded to this, and others have as well. You have to have an educated farmer audience. You have to have farmers that you can pull on to be leaders in that space. In the retail side, that means we also have to be educating that group of people. We heard this morning from Jason. He talked a little bit about some of the questions that the retailers and the crop advisors have about this space. I would agree with him. When I engage with certified crop advisors in the soil health space, I sometimes meet with skepticism. They are more skeptical of soil health as a whole than the farmer community is. Does that matter? I would say that it does. So for us, when we first started communicating about 4Rs, any communication strategy will tell you that the first thing you need to do is create awareness, right? So when I came to TFI 8 years ago, we did a lot of mass media, just as Bianca alluded to, they started with. So you have to take a big approach and just create awareness of the brand, of the issue, of the topic you're working for. We did that, and we did that crop advisor, retailer facing for a couple of reasons. One, that's our audience. TFI has about 50% of the retail locations accounted for within our membership. It's an easy audience for us to communicate with, but it's also the person who's going to be making change with the farmer, right? They're the ones who are working with the farmer to take the recommended steps to change practices in the field. Those are the people who can impact practice change, who can impact behavioral change. So I think you can't ignore the retailer as one of your key audiences. But you have to remember that the retailers are a little bit skeptical. For us, again, the reason we're doing the survey is when we analyzed the awareness of 4R in the crop advisor retailer space, because of the work we've done in the last decade, we're at 85 to 95% awareness. They recognize that brand, they recognize what we're talking about in that space. It's a known quantity in the crop advisor space now. When we ask farmers about 4R, we're more like in the 25% range. And so clearly we have work to do, and that's what's driving us. So we're looking at the broad awareness campaign and then dialing it down more specifically with local opinion leaders. Soil health resonates with farmers, okay? When we talked about our 4R message, we did an evaluation of a few different messages around 4R, and the number one linkage that resonated the most with them was improving soil health, and that means improving crop performance. So they liked the interest in understanding 4R nutrient stewardship as it would have an impact on soil health. Now, there was a survey that was done a year and a half ago, 2 years ago now, in Iowa, as they were looking at developing the 4R Plus campaign. And in that space, again, soil health resonated with farmers. Interestingly, they were trying to address the nutrient reduction strategy and water quality issues, but for a farmer, it's pretty easy to say, oh, a water quality issue? I'm doing the right things on my farm. It must be somebody else who needs to change to address the water quality issue. But for soil health, it's really hard to push that off on somebody, right? Soil health is on your farm. Soil health you own. It's easier to own soil health than water quality. And so that's a big reason that with the nutrient reduction strategy effort in Iowa, they started looking at 4R+. I will say, though, they asked crop advisors the same thing. Crop advisors, skeptical. They, again, weren't going down the soil health path the same way farmers are. It's very important to identify your leaders. So we have a program called our 4R Advocates. We now have 70 of those. We gain about 5 every year through a nomination and awards process. When we asked farmers what they wanted to know about the 4R space, beyond cost, what did they tell us? Cost, right? It's the same thing Jason was saying this morning. It's not just the cost as a reduction of fertilizer application rates, not just a cost in the fertilizer savings. It's also a cost in labor changes, fuel changes, equipment changes. And so you have to be able to build all of that out as you communicate in that space. And so we're able to use our 4R Advocates as case studies to show real-world examples and to build out that cost. And that's actually what we're doing right now, building out a lot of case studies that are across the geographies of the US and also across the many cropping systems. Finally, when we get the message right, we could sway opinion. So just within our survey, we were able to move people who either weren't fully aware of the 4 R's, we were able to increase favorability across a 15-minute phone call by just providing them increasing amounts of basic information. And I think even more importantly than that, that lower number on the right, you see, we were able to, we were asking people their willingness to implement practices. And for people who were kind of in the beginning, basically said they were implementing no to a few 4R practices on their farm, right? So not doing anything on their farm currently. When we initially asked them, they said, we're not looking at doing much more than that. But as we told them more and more about the space, and we gave good information to them so that they could assess change, that lower group of people that were the lowest performers, 35 to 61% increase, basically a 25% increase in their willingness to try new practices when we gave them good information. And I think that's just super important to think about, making sure we've got a simple message, we're providing them the information they want, and we're working through their retailer to get them the information from their trusted source. And so that's what we have gained in our 4R work. Again, we continue to evolve, we have to continue to evaluate, and we have to continue to keep changing to make sure that we're keeping up with what their needs are. And with that, I look forward to the discussion later.